This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 473, entitled More on Baby Farms. Description. This flyer goes into further detail on the concept of creating baby farms, in which professional mothers are paid by governments to grow and raise many kids, with help from MRMs, that's male role models, so as to avoid the risk that whole populations get wiped out as traditional parenthood becomes ever more unpopular. The flyer itself. More on Baby Farms by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer is a brainstorming on the idea of the baby farm, which is a follow-up of flyer number 181, which suggested that the mothers in the baby farm could be impregnated by smarter men, thus giving the government, who pays these women to be professional mothers, baby factories, living on baby farms, to be able to exercise a certain degree of eugenics, thus raising the average IQ of the population. This flyer reflects further on the idea of the baby farm, since it looks increasingly likely that governments around the world will be forced to take baby farms seriously as a way to prevent whole populations from being wiped out. I begin by giving a brief overview of just what a baby farm is and why they need to be created. A baby farm, as its name suggests, is a farm, a community, a commune, a collective of several apartments in which professional mothers are paid by the government to have lots of kids and to raise them as a means to ensure that whole populations do not get wiped out due to an ever-diminishing popularity of parenthood on the part of the majority of the population. This flyer provides further ideas and thoughts on the issue of baby farms that were not expressed in the previous flyer on the topic, that is flyer number 181. Since I wrote that flyer some years ago, many countries are now becoming increasingly alarmed at how low their birth rates are, that is, the average number of children born per woman. One of the most extreme cases is South Korea, which has a birth rate of 0.84 children per woman, whereas the replacement rate is 2.1 children per woman. Brackets, that is, one kid is needed to replace herself in the next generation and one to replace her husband, plus a bit more since some children die before reproducing. The fluffy feminists took over the divorce courts in the 70s and made divorce so toxic for men that in many countries now 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and have kids, thus crashing the birth rate. Since women benefit so mightily from the privileges in the divorce courts, it may be years, even several decades, before the divorce courts are men-fared, so that young men are prepared to be fathers again. So it may be necessary for governments to intervene by creating baby farms as a means to prevent whole populations from being wiped out. Of course, the masses will be pushing governments hard to men-fair the gender laws, to reform the divorce courts, to legislate the para, it's paternity rejection right, to establish gender equality committees in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that gender issues of both sexes are treated equally, which is far from being the case today, which is still strongly biased by the assumption that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, that women are the oppressed and men are the oppressors, which to masculists is a sick joke. So there may be a real need for the establishment of baby farms. So how would such institutions be organised? According to what criteria? This flyer contains ideas off the top of my head, that is brainstorming on just what a baby farm might look like and how it might be run. Over time, of course, the concept of the baby farm needs to be thought through by a team of experts who recommend to their governments what they think would be a good way to organise things that meet certain criteria. Here are some of my initial thoughts. I don't think it would be a good idea that a baby farm consists only of female adults. Research shows that children, especially boys, who are raised by single mothers, suffer more as adults from problems such as alcoholism, delinquency, teenage pregnancy, violent crime, depression, etc., than children raised with both a mother and father. If there is a father in the household, then boys are provided with a male role model, which is to their benefit. If the government is going to pay these women to be professional mothers, then the government is in a position to impose on these mothers certain constraints. That is, the professional mother, the baby farmer, will sign a contract with the government, receiving a mothering salary from the government in return for her raising a lot more than 2 kids to make up for the shortfall of babies not being born by the rest of the population. One such governmental constraint is that the mother is not to move for a certain period, so that she remains present for years while the children grow up. If she's to remain stationary, then it would probably be better for her and her kids to live together with other such baby farmer mothers, creating a small village. You may have heard the expression, quote, "It takes a village to raise a child," end quote. This was possible with small villages in the past, before the Industrial Revolution and the need for the nuclear family. By having other mothers to look after her kids, that is, those who came from her womb, she can share out the burden of raising them. If she gets sick, then other mothers can take over her kids for a while. This will probably be better for the kids, since if the mother is psychologically damaged in some way, then the kids can benefit from the saner mothers in the commune. This raises a good point, and that is that the government will need to screen out potentially bad mothers by not allowing them to be baby farmers in the first place. So probably trainee baby farmer mothers can be assistants in the baby farm, so as to be tested for suitability for full-time motherhood later in her baby farming career. Her salary could be determined by supply and demand. If there are too few baby farmer mothers, then the government can raise the salaries of these women so that more women are attracted into the job. Who should be the fathers? Here, the government can offer potential sperm donors from a catalogue, taking advantage of women's evolved hypergamy, that is, the female instinct to mate up, to want the superior DNA of a superior male for her kids, so that her kids have superior DNA to herself, which is obviously good for the species, so evolved. How to provide the children with male role models? By having professional fathers who live in the commune, who may or may not be paired off in relationships with the mothers. Perhaps married couples or committed couples could join a baby farm and be paid to be full-time parents of a string of kids shared out with other parents in the baby farm. These male baby farmers could also be contracted by the government to raise the kids, giving these kids male role model experience. That is so vital for growing boys, that boys today, raised in an ever-growing number of single mother households, lack. Governments need to start experimenting with such baby farms so that a successful functioning formula can be found and then scaled up so that millions of children are raised in millions of baby farms. How would breakups of couples be handled in a baby farm? One of the important factors in a baby farm is the continued presence of the parenting adults, so as to avoid the trauma inflicted on millions of children by today's single household divorce, where one of the two parents leaves the home, so the children are forced to be parented by only one parent, so often lack any male role model experience, especially for boys who also attend primary schools, where there are very few male primary school teachers, so they grow up in a female-dominated world which thwarts their psychological development as males. If a man and a woman in the baby farm develop a relationship which later goes sour, then if the baby farm is fairly large, then the two of them can live apart but still on the farm, and still keep contact with the kids in their charge, so as not to break the parent-child bond. The baby farm fathers would also need to be placed under contract by the government, committing the presence of the fathers for a given non-negligible number of years. These men would also need to be given a trial period to see if their personalities are suitable for being active fathers or male role models, that's MRMs. If some of the children are born to a couple who both live on the same baby farm and that couple divorces, then the two parents can still stay on the baby farm but sleep in different quarters that are separated but within walking distance of the children's area. What about sleeping arrangements? It would probably be best to have the children born of the mother sleep close to her and have an MRM be close by too. If a child has a nightmare, then the child can be comforted by either the mother or the MRM. What about eating? Probably the baby farm could have a communal eating hall with professional cooks, etc. It's quite likely that baby farms may end up a considerable expense for governments, with lots of additional staff to make them function smoothly. What about employment of the mothers and MRMs? It might be desirable to provide supplementary work besides the daily work of raising children, many children. The whole point of the baby farm is to raise many children and to have a village mentality of many parents to raise many kids communally, so that each child is raised by several parents. By having the children sleep in the presence of their birth mother, the mother can give her love to the kids, so that the kids feel loved and nurtured, which is so vital to their psychological health. The MRMs will also grow emotionally attached to the kids in his charge, simply due to his daily sustained contact with them. Under contract, mothers and MRMs will not be allowed to flit off the baby farm easily. Their continued presence will be vital for sustained child raising. To be a baby farmer will be a major commitment on the part of a baby farm mother or an MRM. I have the feeling I've only scratched the surface of potential problems that baby farms will toss up, but governments around the world will probably soon start experimenting with such arrangements and can share experiences, holding international conferences to discuss ideas, until a workable model, or several of them, emerge that governments can then scale up in their millions to avoid whole populations from being wiped out. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 470 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.